Qigong and sport. That is going to be the topic of this episode of Qi Life. I'm walking through the grounds of the local soccer club, or I guess in some parts of the world that would be called a football club, same sport, different name given for it in different parts of the world. And I thought this would be a good location to talk about the relationship between Qigong and sport. It's interesting. I guess people have lots of different ideas about Qigong, but one idea that is common is that Qigong it's just for health and well-being. And look, it's true, Qigong is fantastic for health and well-being. There's so many benefits in that area that can be gained from Qigong practice. But if we look historically at the different ways that Qigong has been used, historically there were three main areas that Qigong was applied to. So one was health and well-being, and that's in different ways, through doing exercises, just to maintain your health or to regain health, and also as a specific treatment. Then also another application was spirituality or religion. Several different strands of religions or spiritual folk groups within China used Qigong amongst their practices as a way to develop their understanding, their sense of connection with the world around them, and so on. And then there's a third really standout way that Qigong was applied, and that was to martial arts. Now, specifically Kung Fu, of course. Kung Fu is the name commonly given to martial arts from China. Now, Kung Fu, of course, requires a high level of physical performance. Maybe you could argue some of the highest possible, because the way those martial arts were practiced many years ago, they weren't just an interest or a hobby, or something that you're doing to get fit. They were life and death. And so people had a great interest in really achieving a high level of skill and physical performance as part of that, because they needed to be able to, their life was on the line if their skills were put to the test. And so it was common to use Qigong in that context. And the fact that it was used so much should give us an idea that maybe it worked, or they wouldn't have bothered. They would have, just focused on other things. Now, that's not to say that other types of training aren't important. Just the hard physical training of developing strength and fitness, through methods that we would maybe consider more normal. That's important too. But Qigong was used as a way to develop an additional edge above that, both in terms of things like strength and coordination and agility and things like that, to actually lift that to a level maybe a little higher than they could just through normal training methods, and also to polish skills to a very high level, to develop maybe quite unique and special skills to a level that can seem quite extraordinary. And again, Kung Fu is a place where we see this sort of thing come out. You can probably think of examples of Kung Fu demonstrations and things like that, where practitioners demonstrate sometimes some quite extraordinary skills. So if Qigong can do that for a Kung Fu practitioner, wouldn't that also be useful for someone engaged in sport, particularly sport at a high level, where getting that extra edge is really, really important? It may not be life and death, but there's a lot on the line for someone in a high level professional sporting level, perhaps, where getting every edge really counts. It's interesting, we haven't seen too much of this yet in the modern era, of people applying Qigong within a sporting context. There are a few examples I can think of. One of the most famous is probably Tiger Woods, the famous golfer. had some scandals in more recent times, but for a long time he was an extraordinarily skilled golfer. And he learnt and practiced Qigong as a young child growing up. And so some people attribute some of that success, some of that skill that he later had and showed in his golfing career, at least partially, to that Qigong training from in his earlier life. There's a famous American football player, I can't remember his name, who again is, I don't think so much as a child, but later on practiced Qigong, and there's a little bit of fame and talk about how maybe that contributed to his success. I know also there was a Kung Fu and Qigong teacher in Australia who for a while was training some of their football teams. And that was specifically in terms of physical resilience and power development for when they're tackling each other or being tackled, to be able to withstand those knocks and deliver force more effectively. So there are some examples of this, but not a lot yet. And I guess that's interesting. I wonder if this is just simply because at the moment Qigong's not that well known. Awareness of it is growing very rapidly. Certainly a lot more people know about Qigong now than even a year ago, and certainly than 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But overall, there's not a large and long awareness of Qigong in the Western world, at least. And so it could be partially that there just hasn't been the awareness for people to try it and try applying it to their sport. So maybe there's some development still to happen there. But I think it's a fascinating area to maybe explore, to look at how Qigong could be used to really help to give, and maybe sometimes it would just be a small advantage, but particularly, to athletes in different contexts, and other times maybe it would be quite a large advantage. Because Qigong does have, it's quite bright that way, might go another way. Qigong does have an ability to really help us develop in so many ways. There's some clear physical things there's some different training methodologies that can bring out different aspects of our physical skill. And then I think a big part of it as well, because we're focusing on energy in Qigong, which is quite a subtle thing, really, it really helps us to tune in a more finely detailed way to what's going on in our body and to coordinate all those functions together effectively. And that then can create this synchronicity between all of the functions of the body to really reach the peak of what is possible for us. Interesting thing to explore. Certainly something I think I'd probably be interested in exploring a bit in the future as well. I wonder if part of the reason why we haven't seen so much Qigong applied to sports as well, aside from just a low level of awareness, which is growing. So I think awareness is growing, so it's likely just as awareness grows, more people might try that. I wonder as well if part of it is because to some extent people separate out different aspects of Qigong, and they do just see that sort of health and well-being aspect of Qigong. There's the classic sort of idea that, well, Qigong is just for old people. And again, as maybe another layer to the awareness, an awareness that actually Qigong can be much more than that. Qigong can be something that, yes, it is good for old people because it maintains health and well-being. In fact, it's good for young people because it also maintains health and well-being. But for older people, they start to become much more aware of their health and well-being as things start to break down, so they put more value on that. But that also, it can be used for not just maintaining health and well-being, but taking things to a higher level, to a high performance level. And yeah, I guess that's often associated with the martial arts. I have a fair bit of experience with martial arts, with Kung Fu, and with the application of Qigong within Kung Fu. So, I have quite a good awareness of some of the ways that it can be applied to a high performance level, not just to basic health and well-being. So interesting thing to explore in the future. I guess part of what made me think of making this vlog was I am actually in a small way doing some of this in a workshop that's coming up quite soon. Not necessarily so much at a high performance level, but I'm participating in a workshop. I'm joining in, I guess, co-hosting, I guess you could say, a workshop to do with Qigong and running. Now, specifically, we're just going to be looking at a few small aspects of Qigong, so specifically some aspects of breathing, and the application is to mindful running. So it's not necessarily to winning races, but to a well-being aspect of running in terms of being more mindful while running and getting more benefit from running by being mindful while you're doing it. But that mindfulness can also contribute to high performance as well. So just a very small little tiny piece of applying Qigong to a different type of activity than maybe people would commonly think of applying it to. In this case specifically running, but it certainly could be applied in many ways to many different types of sports. And I think that's something that it would be interesting to see explored more in the future. I may do some of that myself, or it'll be interesting maybe to see if other people do that as well as Qigong becomes more well known. Now, maybe as a separate topic, while we're talking about Qigong and sport, what about Qigong as a sport itself? How would that be? I think that's an interesting one. I think you could compare it to maybe like yoga as a sport or meditation as a sport. It's kind of an odd concept. I think there are such things as some yoga competitions, which is kind of an odd concept. I'm not aware of any meditation competitions though. And that is because often what we're seeking to achieve with something like yoga or meditation, or in this case specifically Qigong, is we're often trying to achieve things that are quite subtle and not necessarily easily measurable, whereas the purpose of sport is generally to achieve something that's easily measurable. You know, that's the spirit of competition, to be able to measure those results. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to see if at some point someone thinks, hey, let's have a Qigong competition. Could be an interesting idea. But overall, I think probably the place of Qigong is more as a support to, you know, using some of those less measurable things as a support for the performance in sport to achieve some of those more measurable things. Anyway, that's, I guess, what I was musing about with Qigong and sport. Maybe you enjoyed the musings. If you did, like, comment, share, subscribe, all those good things. And you know, I'll muse about some other things related to Qigong on the vlog at some point in the future, probably quite soon. If you're interested in that, so it's mindful breathing and running, so some aspects of Qigong and breathing and running, I will put a link to the workshop that I'm doing below in the description. You can check that out as well. All right, see you on the next one. One final thought. If you're interested in quite a humorous example of the application of Qigong to sports, there's quite a funny one that actually ties this all back together, being at these little local soccer or football grounds. So there's a movie called Shaolin Soccer. So as in Shaolin as the temple, and soccer, and it's about some, it's fictitious of course, but it's very funny. It's about some former Shaolin monks who use their kung fu or their Qigong skills, or rather they're struggling to apply their kung fu or Qigong skills to modern everyday life. But they're really highly skilled and struggling to fit in the modern society, and then they end up forming a soccer team where they can use those skills together. It's very very humorous if you want a humorous take on this topic.